I want to be really honest about this. As a geologist, we were giving people the heads up in the 1970s, saying that we need to prepare and adapt to the obvious changes that we can see in the geologic record, in the ice cores from Antarctica and from Greenland. We can see, first of all, that there are rhythms and cycles, number one. Number two, we can see where we are in those rhythms and cycles. And number three, we can see the impact of human existence because we've only been here 200,000 years. So we haven't been here geologically. I mean, that's not a drop in the bucket. One of the first things that you see in those ice cores, and if I knew we were going to do this, I would have had the charts with us. You can see very clearly the rhythms of the temperatures rising and falling in geologic time. All right. And we are at a place where we should be in a warming trend. I would be concerned if we weren't warming. Are we the warmest that we've ever been? Absolutely not. The planet has been much, much warmer, and life continued to thrive than it is right now. Then you overlay that with the CO2 levels. And we're being told that the carbon dioxide increase is what causes the warming. The data doesn't support that. Because when you look at the ice cores, what you see is that the warming happens first. And then the CO2 rises after it. I'm going to give you a mechanism for this in a moment, but this is what the data shows very clearly. CO2 levels, we're being told, I mean, literally, we've had politicians tell us the Earth is gone in 10 years. We've had people say that.
Yeah.
We had a president not long ago that said to us that the conversation is over, that it is sealed science and there's no need to talk about it anymore. And this is a tactic that is used to frighten people into making choices. So when we look at the CO2, we have had times in Earth's history people are familiar with Jurassic Park. So the Jurassic period, during Cretaceous period, CO2 levels, right now, they're around 420, 430 parts per million. Are they higher than they have been in our lifetime? Yes. Are they higher than they have been in the 20th century? Yes. But the 20th century was at a low point in the CO2. We have had periods in our history, Jurassic, Cretaceous, we're looking at 1,000 parts per million, 2,000 parts per million. And here's what happens. The Earth is very green because that CO2 feeds the forest. The forests are lush and abundant. New forms of life emerged. The temperatures are globally warmer, a little warmer. And it's only a problem. It's only a problem for us because we built a civilization expecting that climate was static, that it would never change. So we built 30-story condos 10 feet from the edge of the ocean, thinking that it would always be 10 feet from the edge of the ocean. So we've been telling people since the 70s, we need to adapt to this. Now, what is it if it's not human fossil fuels that are doing this? We've had much higher. And by the way, temperature and CO2 aren't always related. We've had higher CO2 where the temperatures were low. And we've had places where the temperatures were high and the CO2 was low. So it's a very complex mix. So now I'm going to go big. I'm going to go big here. What the science is designed to be constantly updated. So what I'm saying to you now can be updated. It can change as we discover more. When you do a cross section of our planet, it's not a solid ball. I think most people know that. There are layers in the planet. The innermost part of our planet is called the core, and it is believed to be a solid iron nickel core. That's important. That's the magnetics. It's important with the magnetic fields. That's a solid core. The outer core around that is a molten core. All right. And then around that is the mantle. It's about 1,800 miles thick. And then our Earth's crust, it's only about 36 miles thick average on the whole planet. It's pretty thin, a pretty thin layer. What happens every once in a while is that inner core begins to change the way it rotates and its motion in a way that creates ripples in the outer core, in the molten outer core, that creates ripples in the mantle. And that mantle then begins in thin places in the Earth's crust, which is only 36 miles average anyway, thin places, that mantle begins to extrude onto the surface. What you see is an increase in earthquakes, an increase in volcanic activity at plate boundaries, which is exactly 7.8 on the Richter scale, the earthquakes in Turkey, India, Pakistan. Those are triple plate bound. 3 plates come together right there. Yellowstone National Park, they're closing parts of the park because the geysers are behaving abnormally, and they're concerned that something is going to give. Shasta and St. Helens, Mount St. Helens is becoming active again. These are all exactly what you would expect. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. What's changing that inner core? Told you we're going to go cosmic here. Every moment of every day, we've got cosmic rays hitting this planet, hitting your body, hitting my body, and the atoms are so far apart, we're mostly empty space. And those cosmic rays, they go right through us, not a problem, don't cause a problem at all. They go right through the crust, don't cause a problem. They go right through the mantle, don't cause a problem. They go right through the outer core, don't cause a problem. The inner core is dense iron, nickel, under the temperatures and the pressure at the center of our planet. When those particles hit, they don't go through, and they begin to heat that inner core. And that is one of the things that causes all of the effects that I've just explained. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The cosmic rays that come to us appear to come in volleys over very precise periods of time, about every 26,000 years from the center of our Milky Way. And because of the distance and the speed of light and the speed of energy, it takes about 26,000 years. So we are now in the process, and this is what the Mayans, apparently in their calendar, this is why they were so concerned to give us a heads up. We are experiencing that 26,000 year cycle that is causing all of this. Now, I promised I'd come back to CO2. When that magma from the mantle comes up under the crust to the thin places, well, the ocean floor is way thinner than where Everest is, where you've got, a mountain all the way down to the bottom of the crust. So the mantle begins to warm the ocean from underneath. And this is exactly, you're seeing the glaciers are melting from underneath. They're not melting from on top because of the atmosphere, they're melting from underneath. And I spent some time studying this. I don't want to get really technical, but it's interesting that the surface the air temperature can only warm the oceans down to very specific levels. And the heat that is warming the oceans is coming from low. Here's why this is important. High school science. Cooler water, salt water, the oceans are saline. Cooler salt water hold more carbon dioxide. And the oceans absorb much of the carbon dioxide that's produced on the planet, as well as the forests. When those oceans warm, they can't hold as much carbon dioxide. They release it into the atmosphere. And NASA, you go to the NASA website, and they'll say over 90% of the CO2 is coming from the oceans. They acknowledge that. They don't acknowledge why the oceans are warming, but they do say that it's coming from the oceans. So we're living this cycle that has been hijacked and weaponized and distorted by going to our humanness, our vulnerable primal instincts. When we see someone suffering because of a fire in Northern California or Hawaii, people lose their homes, sometimes they lose their lives, say, my God, that's horrible. We want to help them. And then the narrative turns and says, well, it's your fault because you're burning fossil fuels. And it's that guilt then that drives people to make political changes that for reasons that aren't necessarily supported by the science. Now, there's a caveat to everything I'm saying. And I know for some people, they've never heard this. And for other people, they don't like perhaps what I'm saying. We definitely need to stop burning fossil fuels. And here's the kicker. We've had the technology to do it for over 70 years. If the powers that be were serious, if they were really serious, if the nations, the governments, the United Nations, those organizations, if they were really serious about benevolent change to help people rather than the political and the financial change, they would unleash the technology that we've had for over at least 70 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about Tesla. This isn't Tesla technology. These are other forms of technology that we have had that produce clean, green, sustainable energy that cannot be weaponized into a nuclear weapon, that can't melt down like a Fukushima reactor, with materials that are abundant in the Earth's crust. Every nation has them. They're inexpensive. You can't charge what you charge for oil. And the other piece of this, Will, is that oil is so precious. And as a geologist, I'm fascinated by this. It is one of the few components that we cannot replicate in the lab. You cannot artificially make petroleum. That's important because even if we stop burning it, we use it in over 6,000 applications in our lives every day that we don't even think about. You and I and our audience could not be having this conversation if petroleum was not a big part of our lives, because of the components in the computers, the wires, the cables. People say, well, what about solar and wind? What people don't know is it takes fossil fuel energy to produce the silica that is used in the solar panels. It doesn't occur naturally. It takes fossil fuels to make the aluminum frames or the stainless steel frames, and to make the concrete and to pump the water. It's so precious. We need to stop burning it because we need it in medical supplies, in tubes, and plastics that we use to keep us alive, in hospital conditions. There's nothing that we do in our lives that is not impacted by petroleum, and it's been demonized. And young people are now afraid of it, and they hate it because of the narrative, when in truth, it is a blessing and it can free us. And if we want to stop burning it, we could do it in a heartbeat if those technologies were made available. And I think we'll see this in our lifetimes. So I just wanted to have that caveat. We definitely need to go green, clean, green, sustainable, and solar and wind is not the way to do it. Because people don't realize when we talk about solar and wind or batteries, and I love all of them, and there's a place for all of them, not for every human on the face of the earth to power their civilization, because they are made of 17, they're called rare earth elements. 17 rare earth elements go into computer chips, solar panels, batteries. The cobalt from the batteries comes mostly from Democratic Republic of Congo. Unregulated child labor. I mean, if you ever see the films, those kids are barefoot in t-shirts and shorts in this toxic water in the mines, digging with their bare hands into the earth for the ore that will be converted into the cobalt that they will then sell to China, that China will then convert into the batteries that they'll sell into the West. It's horrible what's happening. Amnesty International, UNICEF, they've all done studies on this. People don't like to think about that. So it's not sustainable. And they are finite sources of energy in countries that aren't our closest friends. They may not be the most reliable sources if things get bad. So these are stepping stones, bridges, but they're not the ultimate answer. And there's a narrative out there that says that they are, and that we're being taught to fear and hate carbon. And the people that suffer the most from that are the people that have the least bandwidth to suffer, that don't have the money for the alternatives, when in fact energy can be available to them inexpensively, or in some cases at no cost, if we did this the way that's possible to do it.